In today's video, I'll be doing a walkthrough of the writing section from SAT Practice Test 8. I've scored perfectly on back-to-back SAT writing sections, and as I go through this practice test, I'm going to show you the most efficient way to answer each and every question, and along the way, I'll also give you my tips, tricks, and some grammar rules that you need to know for the SAT writing section. So with all that being said, make sure to like and subscribe, and let's go ahead and get started. Compost, don't waste this waste. Over the past generation, people in many parts of the United States have become accustomed to dividing their household waste products into different categories for recycling. Then we have some sort of transition here. Paper may go in one container, glass and aluminum in another, regular garbage in a third. So what we can see that we're ultimately doing is we're providing an example in this second sentence here of what we talked about in that previous sentence, right? In that previous sentence, we talked about dividing up the household waste into different categories, and now we are giving that example. So our answer for number one will be for example. All right, let's keep reading. Recently, some U.S. cities have added a new category, compost organic matter, such as food scraps and yard debris. Like paper or glass recycling, composting demands a certain amount of effort from the public in order to be successful, but the inconveniences of the composting are far outweighed by its benefits. Most people think of banana peels, eggshells, and dead leaves as waste, but compost is actually a valuable resource with multiple practical uses. When utilized as a garden fertilizer, compost provides nutrients to soil and improves plant growth while deterring or killing pests and preventing some plant diseases. It also enhances soil texture, encouraging healthy roots and minimizing or annihilating the need for chemical fertilizers. Now, right away, you should be able to recognize that annihilating is not fitting with that style and tone of our passage, which is what we're asked to maintain in question number 2. Now, what does? Well, if we were to say eliminating, that's perfect because it's telling us we no longer have a need for chemical fertilizers while fitting in with the same style and tone that we've had throughout this passage. Okay, so if we go and look at C and D, ousting and closing the door on, those both have way too much of a casual tone in order to be fitting in this academic style essay. All right, moving on to number 3 now. So we have better than soil at holding moisture. Compost minimizes water waste and storm runoff. And we'll have some sort of verb here on watering costs and helps reduce erosion on embankments and near bodies of water. One thing that should jump out to you is that when you have a list with verbs included in that list, you want to make sure you have parallelism with those verbs. Essentially what this means is you want to identify the verbs. In this case, we have minimizes, we have helps. And what we want to do then is we want to make sure we have the same tense, right? So in this case, that's going to be present tense. And we also want to make sure that we have the same structure. So in this case, we see that our verb is coming before the subject. So we want to make sure that we have that in all three of these lists. Or I'm sorry, in all three of these phrases within this list, right? So we have compost minimizes water waste and storm runoff. We need to have increases right here then. So increases is our verb. It has to lead in order to match the other two parts of our list in structure. So our answer there has to be C to maintain that parallelism. All right, moving on to number 4. We have in large quantities, which one would expect to see when it is collected for an entire municipality, compost. So what we can see here is that we have this comma before this parentheses. The reason behind that is we have this prepositional phrase of in large quantities, which needs to have a comma after it since it's at the beginning of a sentence. But we also have this non-essential phrase or clause in which one would expect to see when it is collected for an entire municipality. So I'll go ahead and highlight this non-essential phrase or clause so you can see it easier. Now what we know is when we have a non-essential phrase or clause, we have to offset it with either 2 commas, 2 parentheses, or 2 em dashes. But keep in mind, if you have a comma and you also have a non-essential phrase or clause, and they have to be, for example, in this case, we have to have that comma, not because of the non-essential phrase or clause, but because of something else. For example, in this case, that introductory prepositional phrase, we can't use commas then to offset our non-essential phrase or clause because then we'd have 2 commas in a row. We don't want to have that. Okay, so instead what we're going to do is we're going to use parentheses. You also wouldn't really want to use em dashes in that case. You don't really want to have an em dash and then a comma. But what you can have is you can have parentheses and then a comma. So in this case, then what we have to answer with is ultimately going to be answer choice B. Okay, we have to have that parentheses. We don't want to have that semicolon. We have to have that parentheses, like I said, so we can get rid of A and C. And ultimately, our answer there will be B. All right, let's keep reading. Compost can be converted into a natural gas that can be used as a fuel for transportation or heating and cooling systems. In spite of all compost potential uses, however, most of this so-called waste is wasted, according to the Environmental Protection Agency, EPA. And then we have the writer wants to include information from the graph that's consistent with the description of compost in the passage. Which choice most effectively accomplishes this goal? Well, we have to go to the graph and see what ultimately is accurate and then also what's applicable here. Keep in mind we're talking about food waste here. So saying something about metal ending up in landfills doesn't really make sense, especially considering that what comes after it doesn't talk about food waste. So ultimately what I'm really trying to key in on here is that 33 million tons of food waste, and I want to see if that's accurate. I see that it is. We have amount of waste in millions of tons. I've got food waste right here. I see if I draw that line across, that's going to be right around 33. Okay, so my answer there for number 5 will be answer choice D. All right, let's go ahead and keep reading. We have remarkably, and then number 6, looks like we're asked something again about the graph. In this case, we want to support the paragraph's main idea with accurate, relevant information from the graph. Which choice most effectively accomplishes this goal? Well, our main idea so far is really talking about the food waste. So we want to keep on, focusing in on that. So if we go down to the graph, we see that food waste is ultimately the highest, right? It's got the most waste. in 2009. So we want to state something about that. So we have remarkably, and then something, was discarded in landfills that year than any other substance, including plastics or paper. Well, what was discarded more than any other substance? That was food waste, as we saw in that graph with that 33 million tons. So our answer there will be C. All right, let's go ahead and keep reading. We have even worse than. Keep in mind that this has to be THAN, okay, because we're ultimately making a comparison between something before and something after. So we can go ahead and get rid of answer choices C and A because they have the wrong then. Now, keeping in mind then that we don't need to have a comma after even worse. In fact, we can't have a comma there, okay, because we have to make this comparison. In order to make that comparison, we can't split up worse from than, okay, so our answer there has to be answer choice B. All right, and then we have the squandering of this useful resource is the fact that compost in landfills cannot break down due to the lack of necessary air and moisture. As a result, organic material that is sent to landfills, this has to be contributes. How do I know that? Well, I know that immediately because I was able to recognize my subject as I read in the sentence. Okay, in this case, what we see is we have that is sent to landfills. We can ignore that when determining our number of our subject. Okay, our number of our subject comes right here. Organic material. Okay, material is singular. Because material is singular, we're able to have a verb that is singular. If we take a look at our answer choices, we see answer choice D, that would be a plural verb. Okay, answer choice B, that would also be a plural verb. Answer choice A, which would be contribute, that would also be a plural verb. The only singular verb here is answer choice C. C is our correct answer. It also matches the present tense that we've used throughout this passage. Now we look at question number 9. To the release of methane, a very potent greenhouse gas. That's perfect. We wouldn't change potent to sturdy, influential, or commanding because none of those would make sense in the context of our passage. Okay, if we're talking about a greenhouse gas, potent makes that makes a lot of sense to use there. Okay, it's the only choice that makes sense for number 9. Moving on to number 10, which choice provides the most effective transition from the previous paragraph? Well, let's go ahead and take a look at what this paragraph is talking about first then. So we have cities such as San Francisco and Seattle have instituted mandatory composting laws requiring individuals and businesses to use separate bins for compostable waste. This strict approach may not work everywhere. However, given the clear benefits of composting and the environmental costs of not composting, all municipalities should encourage their residents either to create their own compost piles for use in backyard gardens or to dispose of compostable materials in bins for collections. We can go and answer 11 since we're right here. What we have ultimately are correlative conjunctions. So examples of correlative conjunctions are either or. Another example would be neither nor. Okay, so these are going to be conjunctions that are used together. Okay, so you'd have some sort of separation between them and then you'd use them. If you want to see a list of them, you can Google correlative conjunction list and you can kind of take a look to familiarize yourself with them before you take the SAT. But in this case, we obviously know that either has to go with or since that's its correlative conjunction there. So our answer there would be A. Now going back up to number 10. Transitioning into this next paragraph, well, now we're talking about laws and policies. Previously, we were talking about facts regarding negative effects of food waste, how if we compost it, it's going to lead to positive outcomes, right? So how we should be composting the food waste. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at our answer choice. We have option A, while composting can sometimes lead to accidental pollution through the release of methane gas. No, we want to show that composting is a good thing, right? And then we have option B, though government regulations vary, that's not really addressing what came before this paragraph. We have option C, armed with these facts. We just discussed a bunch of facts regarding why composting is a good thing and should be implemented. So yes, C will be our answer there. If we take a look at D, mindful of the setback, there's really no setback we're talking about in that previous paragraph. All right, so now we can go and move on to our next passage. We can just quick brush over this passage, make sure that we didn't miss any questions as far as, skipping over them and coming back to them later. We see that we didn't, so we can go and keep going to this next passage now. All right, so we have a lion's share of luck. It's the beginning of February, and as they do every year, thousands of people line H Street, the heart of Chinatown in Washington, D.C. The crowd is gathered to celebrate Lunar New Year. The street is a sea of red. I see I'm repeating the word red, right? I'm combining these sentences. An indication of that is obviously you have, the underlined portion, including a period. If I'm ever repeating a word twice, I'm always just going to look to get rid of that second word. Sometimes it'll be a name. And then what I can do almost always, I'm not going to say always, but a large percent of the time is if I'm able to have that repeat word and I can take away that second one, put a comma there, and then I can have an A positive. So in this example, if I take out red is, I can put a comma after red and have this A positive describing it, okay? So I can just put a comma after red and then have the traditional Chinese color of luck and happiness. And then I have that A positive describing red. It's perfect. I avoid the wordiness that exists in answer choices B, C, and D. Moving on to 13. Buildings draped with festive red banners and garlands. Okay, we see all of our words are the same, only differences in punctuation. Keep in mind here that we have a list of two ultimate objects here. Our two objects are banners and garlands. Do we need a comma between them? No. Why? Because we have only two of them. Therefore, any answer choice that has a comma after banners, we can get rid of. So we can get rid of A and B. Then between C and D, we see we don't need to have an M dash in answer choice C. So we can go ahead and get rid of answer choice C. And then we have answer choice D. Now you may be wondering why there's no comma between festive and red. The reason why there's no comma between festive and red is because they're not modifying banners equally. If they were modifying banners equally, then there'd be a comma there, but they aren't. So that's why there's no comma there. All right, moving on to number 14. So let's go ahead and read down to there. Lampposts are strung with crimson paper lanterns, which bob in the crisp winter's breeze. The eager spectator awaits the highlight of the New Year parade, the Lion Dance. Experts agree that the Lion Dance originated in the Han Dynasty, 206 BCE to about 220 CE. However, there is little agreement about the dance's original purpose. Some evidence suggests that the earliest version of the dance was an attempt to ward off an evil spirit. Now we're asked for which choice completes the explanation of a possible origin of the lion dance. Well, lions are obviously very fierce, so that's not telling us anything about the origin. The evil spirit was called Neon, also not really telling us a ton about the origin. It's giving us a small detail, but we're not really concerned with that small detail when trying to give, a large history in a short amount of text here. And then we have option C, villagers dressed in lion costumes to scare the spirit away. Yes, that's telling us specifically about the dance, right? Why are they dancing? To scare that spirit away. And then we have option D, the precise location of the village remains lost in history. Once again, that's not really relevant to the lion dance specifically. And then we have another theory is that an emperor, upon waking from a dream about a lion, hired an artist to choreograph the dance. Now, which choice most effectively concludes the paragraph? Well, we need to make sure that we're both wrapping up our previous paragraph, but then also potentially looking to transition into this next paragraph. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read the first sentence of this next paragraph first. The lion dance requires the strength and grace and coordination of two dancers, both of whom are almost completely hidden by the elaborate bamboo and papier-mâché lion costume that they maneuver. I'll go ahead and answer 16 real quick as well. What we have to keep in mind here is that we have to say both of whom rather than just both, because we have to indicate what we're referring to, right? We're referring to the two dancers. By including whom, it tells us that we are referring to the people, right? So rather than, maybe strength and grace or anything like that, we say both of whom so we know exactly who we're referring to and that we are referring to people. So we can go ahead and go to answer choice D. If we take a look at answer choice C, we wouldn't say both of them, because if we say both of them are almost completely hidden by the elaborate bamboo and papier-mâché costume that they maneuver, we end up with a comma splice because we would have two independent clauses connected with a comma and not one of the fanboys. So we can go ahead and get rid of answer choice C. If we take a look at B, we would not say in coordination of two dancers, of which both are almost completely hidden. We would say both of whom, okay? And another quick note on this, the reason we use whom and not who is because it's the object of a preposition, that preposition being of, okay? So that's why we use whom and not who. All right, moving on. So going back to 15, which choice effectively concludes this paragraph, right? We want to make sure that we're wrapping up this discussion of the origin of lion dance and now bringing it back to the present day, because in our next paragraph, we start just simply discussing, what the lion dance is now. So let's go ahead and look for an answer choice that has it. We have option A, the current function of the dance is celebration. No, that's because that's ignoring the fact that we have to wrap up the previous paragraph. Okay, yes, is it transitioning here, but it's not wrapping up what happened in this previous paragraph. We have it turns out the origins of the dance are irrelevant. Well, no, okay, it's not saying that it's irrelevant, so that's kind of a misinterpretation of the text. Also, it's not really transitioning us well into this next paragraph. We have whatever its origins, okay, so that's addressing the fact that in this previous paragraph we talked about the origins. Today the lion dance is a joyous spectacle. Okay, that works because then we are now talking about that spectacle in this next paragraph, a celebration of the promise of the new year. Okay, we see that that works because it wraps up that previous paragraph, albeit in a very short and condensed way by saying whatever its origins, and then it starts to introduce us to this next paragraph. We have option D, things are different these days, of course. Well, that's not addressing or wrapping up our previous paragraph, despite it may be leading us into this next paragraph. But also saying things are different, things aren't necessarily different, right? The dance is supposed to be a custom or a tradition, which is going to make it similar to past days, so that wouldn't make sense either. Let's go ahead and keep reading. We are almost completely hidden by the elaborate bamboo and papier-mâché costumes that they maneuver. One person operates the lion's head as the other guides the torso and tail. Many of the moves in the dance, such as jumps, rolls, and kicks, are similar to martial arts and acrobatics. What you need to know for number 17 is that when you're comparing things, you have to make sure you're comparing the exact same things. So in this case, what we're ultimately comparing are the moves in the dance. Okay, so we want to pay attention to the moves aspect. If we were to just say similar to martial arts and acrobatics, we would get this question wrong. Now, why is that? Well, that's because we have to compare it to the moves in martial arts and acrobatics. Okay, which in this case, we know that those is referring to the moves. So that's why answer D is correct there. Okay, we have to make sure we're comparing to something, to the exact same thing in that next line, right? If we look at answer choice C, martial arts and acrobatics, that's actually the same as answer choice A, I believe. So you can kind of tell that A and C are both going to be incorrect there. And then looking at answer choice B, the disciplines of martial arts and acrobatics, it's not the disciplines we're comparing, it's the moves that we're comparing, right? Those moves. All right, so our answer there for 17 is D. The dancers must be synchronized with the music accompanying the dance, drums, cymbals, and gongs that supply the lion's roar as well as with each other. Okay, now I've got a 1. That's telling me I'm going to go ahead and find the sentence I got to place. I see it's sentence 5. We have their older counterparts. That means I got to find something younger before this sentence, and that'll help me place it. Yellow and white lines dance more slowly and respectively, so potentially some sort of discussion about the yellow and white lines and slow dancing following the sentence. Now let's go ahead and read through. While there are many regional variations of lion dance costume, all make extensive use of symbols and colors. The lion's head is often adorned with a phoenix, which will have something there, or a tortoise for longevity. We're told which choice provides information that is most consistent in style and content with the information about the symbolism of the tortoise. Well, we got to make sure we're consistent in style and content, keeping in mind the symbolism of the tortoise. Well, what's the symbolism of a tortoise? That it's for longevity. So what we put in parentheses then for 18 should show something about what it's for. Okay, we shouldn't say a mythical bird. That doesn't make sense. Saying for new beginnings, that makes sense, okay, because that's providing what the phoenix is representing, right? What's it for? It's for new beginnings. It's matching in that same syntax as well to for longevity. We wouldn't say from Chinese mythology. That's not giving us the specific information that we need about what it's representing. And for symbolic reasons, we need the symbolic reason contained in those parentheses. All right, moving on. We have green lions encourage friendliness. Golden and red lions represent liveliness and bravery. We can go jump down to sentence 6 now. In some variations, lions of different colors represent different ages, and they move accordingly. Next, we have black lions are the youngest. Okay, perfect. Now we're getting that discussion of the younger lions. We'll be able to contrast that to the older lions soon then. Therefore, they dance quickly and playfully. Okay, so immediately I'm looking to place it after 7. I would potentially go on and read question 8, but I also see that I don't need to because the latest sentence that I have is after sentence 7. Therefore, I have to go ahead and answer. I can go ahead and answer that it's going to be D for number 19. All right, and then sentence 8. The appearance of the lions vary, but their message is consistent. Happy New Year. All right, as the parade winds its way through Chinatown, the music crescendos and the lion dance reaches its climax. Okay, dance is singular, so it's not going to be there. We can go ahead and get rid of C and D. In terms of which its it'll be, answer choice A would be it is. Okay, we need the singular and possessive, which will be ITS, no apostrophes. And then we have climax with the plucking of the greens, approaching a doorway in which dangles a red envelope filled with green paper money. One thing you need to recognize immediately, what you just had is an introductory modifying phrase. So whatever comes after this comma has to be what it's modifying. Well, who is actually, approaching the doorway? Well, that's the lion. It's not the lion's teeth. So answer choice A is wrong. Answer choice C is wrong. It's not the envelope. It's not the teeth of the lion. It's the lion, him or herself. Whether it's a female or male lion doesn't really matter. But it has to be the lion. So our answer there has to be B. Then we have it then chews up the bills and spits out the money-filled envelope instead of chewing it up. Well, 1, that's wordy. Okay. Obviously, if it's spitting it out, it didn't chew it up. So we can go ahead and get rid of answer choice A. We look at B, envelope that had been dangling from the doorway. We already know it was dangling from the doorway. That's being repetitive and redundant. Answer choice C, envelope that had the money in it. We already know it had the money in it. That's being repetitive and redundant. So our answer there is D. All right, moving on to the third passage. Court reporting, humans versus machines. Court reporters for years have been the record keepers of the court, taking scrupulous notes during hearings, depositions, and other legal proceedings. Well, what we see here in question number 24 is that we have a list of things. When we have a list, we go ahead and separate those with commas. So we should have a comma after hearing and a comma after depositions. Therefore, our correct answer for number 24 will be answer choice C. Going back to 23, we're told which choice best fits with the tone of the rest of the passage. Well, as we can kind of already see, this is going to be an academic tone, as is the case with almost all writing sections from the SAT. So we can go ahead and pretty much assume an academic tone. We also kind of see that with this first initial sentence. So in that case, we can see we're not going to say super rigorous, spot on, or intense, because those would all fit a more casual tone. In this case, we want to keep it as an academic tone. Therefore, our answer would be A for number 23. And if we find that our tone deviates from that somehow, which I do not expect it to, we could always come back and answer this again. All right, so we have, despite the increasing use of digital recording technologies, court reporting will still play a vital role in courtrooms. And now we got question 25. The writer's considering adding the following graph. We have a salary comparison of court reporters versus other occupations. We have a median salary. We have these occupations. We can go ahead and finish out this paragraph, see if there's any mention of that before we decide whether we want to add it. Although machines can easily make digital audio recordings of court events, they lack the nuance of human court reporters in providing a precise record. Well, as we see here, we're not talking at all about salaries or payment or anything like that, so we can go ahead and get rid of making this addition, right? We're not going to make an addition here because it's irrelevant, right? We're not talking about salaries or costs or anything along those lines. So we have option C, no, because it presents information that's not directly related to the paragraph's discussion of the role of court reporters. Right on, right? Not relevant. It's not directly related. If we look at answer choice D, we have no because it doesn't provide information about the pay scale for more experienced court reporters. That's incorrect. We want to not add it because it's irrelevant. All right, next thing I see is I've got a 1 here, so I'm going to go ahead and find the sentence that I got to place. If I find that question, I see it's going to be sentence number 6. So we have however, so I'm be indicating a contrast from whatever came before it. With the rise of high-quality recording technology, reliance on court reporters, and this should say as record keepers, okay, court reporters is plural. Therefore, I have to have record keepers, plural, so I could go ahead and get rid of answer choices D and answer choices A, and then we don't have to say the word each there. We can just say it as record keepers. So our answer there for 27 would be C, is decreasing. Okay, so after sentence 6, then I could be talking about, reliance on court reporters decreasing, potentially reliance on technology increasing. But I do have to have some sort of contrast coming before sentence 6. So let's go ahead and start reading through this paragraph. Court reporters record the spoken word in real time, most commonly using the technique of stenography. A stenotype machine allows a person to type about 200 words per minute. The speed of speech is about 180 words per minute. The typed words are instantaneously translated onto a computer screen for the judge to view, and the transcript is used later by people who want to review the case, such as journalists and lawyers. Okay, now we have digital audio recordings. That's marking a transition now from what we were initially talking about in these first 3 sentences where we're talking about what court reporters traditionally have been doing. Okay, now we're switching into digital audio recording. So now we're indicating that contrast, and I'll go ahead and finish reading out the sentence, is becoming increasingly popular in courtrooms across the United States, with 6 states using solely audio recordings for general jurisdiction sessions. Well, what did I say should come after sentence 6? Some sort of discussion about court reporters, or the reliance on court reporters decreasing. Right? So now we can go ahead and see that sentence 6 then must be placed between sentences 3 and 4. So my correct answer here will be after sentence 3. So that'd be answer choice C. All right, moving on, we've got question number 26. Okay, so we've got proponents of going digital say technology is the easiest way to get the most accurate record of the proceedings, as the machine records everything faithfully as it occurs and is not subject to human errors such as mishearing or mistyping. And so there's going to be no change. Hopefully you were able to recognize that as I read through that, there was no mistake in grammar, nothing at all. Okay, and also you notice how it flowed very smooth. Well, that's because this is an idiom question. Okay, this is an idiom question. If you don't know what an idiom question is, it's basically testing your ability to recognize whether or not something is idiomatic. If you're wondering what idiomatic means, it pretty much just means what standard English requires you to say, right? If I was in conversation with you, what would you naturally say? If you're someone who's been speaking English since they were born, this should come fairly easy to you. We know that we would say something is not subject to human errors. We wouldn't say subjected to, we wouldn't say subjected from, and we wouldn't say subject for. Okay, we would say subject to. All right, next up we got question number 29. Okay, so we got champions of court reporting, though, argue the opposite. They argue. We already know that they're arguing it, so I'm going to want to get rid of that. I can get rid of their opinion as well, okay, because I already know that they're making this argument, so I don't want to restate that. All right, now if I look at my answer choices, we have the comma, which is, we don't need that, right? We can just go ahead and get into the argument. We can say they argue the opposite, and then use an em dash to introduce that argument, and that's what we want to do here. We use the em dash to introduce the argument, which is that with the increased reliance on technology, errors actually increase, right? We can use the em dash in this case. All right, so we can go ahead and get rid of the other answer choices because they're wordy. We can just use that em dash to introduce their argument. All right, moving on, we got because digital systems record indiscriminately. That's a dependent clause right there, okay? A way that you can tell something is a dependent clause at the beginning of the sentence, it's going to start out with a subordinating conjunction, okay? Because is one of the most common ones. All right, so after indiscriminately, we need to have a comma. We cannot have a semicolon because this is not an independent clause. Likewise, we cannot have a period, okay? So then we're between answer choices B and D. We see that we have the option of including therefore or not including therefore. Well, we have because digital systems record indiscriminately, we should have our subject then come immediately after, right? We wouldn't want to interrupt that, sort of modifier with the word therefore. There's no need to do that. We want to have because digital systems record indiscriminately, they, okay, we're modifying the digital systems here. They is referring back to the digital systems. So we want to have what we're ultimately kind of modifying there. Now keep in mind, this isn't really, necessarily the perfect example of a modifier, but if you look through it with that lens, you can see why we don't need to have therefore there. Okay, that's just adding in an unnecessary word. All right, so 30, our answer there will be B. Let's go ahead and keep going. So we got, they cannot discern parts of the proceedings from other noises in the courtroom. We're going to have some sort of transition here. A digital device does indeed record everything, but that includes loud noises such as book dropping that can make actual words spoken impossible to hear. Well, what is that? That's an example of how these audio recording devices can't discern parts of the proceeding from other noises. I'll go ahead and highlight that so you can see that. That's an example of what we talked about in the previous sentence. So since we're providing an example of that claim, we would want to say, obviously we don't have the option of for example here, but ultimately, we wouldn't say despite this. We wouldn't say therefore because it's not causal, right? We're just kind of giving an example. And then we have consequently, which also it's not a consequence of. But even though, maybe for example could potentially be, maybe a better answer here, it's also really just stating it in other words, right? It's saying a digital audio device records everything, and then it's giving examples, right? It's giving examples of what it records. But if we focus on that first part of the sentence, which I'll go ahead and highlight in yellow, you see that ultimately what we really are doing is we are stating in other words, okay? We are stating that it's recording everything, which is just kind of restating what I highlighted there in green. All right, moving on to number 32 now. We've got can distinguish between the words and distinguish between. Well, we already said distinguish. I don't want to say that twice. So any answer choice that's got distinguish between again, I'm going to go ahead and get rid of. I also want to repeat the word between, so I'm going to get rid of A and B. And then I have can distinguish between the words and when there are the extrinsic noises. No, we can just go ahead and say can distinguish between the words and the extrinsic noises. There's no need to include when there are, okay? We can just say and the extrinsic noises. All right, moving on, we have that need not be recorded. Also, if a witness mumbles, a human court reporter can pause court proceedings to ask the witness to repeat what he or she said. In some cases, digital recording. Now we're told which choice provides the best supporting example for the main idea of the paragraph. I'm going to go ahead and read this last sentence just so I make sure I have a solid understanding of the main idea. Increasing use of technology is a transition from accurate records to adequate records. Okay, says Bob Tate, president of the Certified Court Reporters Association of New Jersey. Ultimately, really the main idea of this paragraph is digital audio recordings aren't reliable. Court reporters are. Therefore, we should use court reporters. So that's what we want to focus on here when we answer question number 33. We have option A, makes it necessary for the judge to make additional announcements at the beginning of the trial. That's not very strong evidence of that sort of distinction between, accurate versus the adequate records, right? We want accurate records. We have option B, requires a courtroom monitor to ensure the equipment's properly functioning. No, we want to focus on the accuracy between the two. Option C leads to changes in the roles and duties of several members in the courtroom staff. No. Option D has led to the need for retrial because of indistinct testimony from key witnesses. Well, what is this indistinct testimony showing? It's showing that we need to have accurate records, which means we cannot use digital audio recording. Therefore, answer D is supporting that main idea of our paragraph there. All right, moving on to passage 4. Fire in space. On Earth, fire provides light, heat, and comfort. Its creation by a process called combustion requires a chemical reaction between a fuel source and oxygen. The shape that fire assumes on Earth is the result of gravitational influence and the movement of molecules. In the microgravity environment of space, and then we'll have either moreover, however, accordingly, or subsequently, combustion and the resulting fire behave in fundamentally different ways than they do on Earth, differences that have important implications for researchers. Well, what you should notice immediately is we have a lot of contrast here, right? We have differences. We have that they behave in fundamentally different ways than they do on Earth. So obviously we're indicating a contrast here. Therefore, since we have a contrast, we're going to use however to indicate that we are making a contrast. We wouldn't use accordingly. We wouldn't use subsequently. Wouldn't be using moreover. Okay, and just to give you some context as far as when to use these transition words, you'd use moreover for a situation where you're really adding on to a point. You would use accordingly where something kind of has a cause and then maybe you're showing why it caused the next thing. You would use subsequently if something came after something else. All right, number 35 now, a group of engineering students from the University of California at San Diego, for example, and then we have tried to find a method to make their biofuel combustion study. Here's the big thing with question number 35 you have to recognize. What's coming at the end here, right? After this last word, we have a non-essential phrase or clause. Okay, now what is that non-essential phrase or clause being referred to? What's it modifying? It's modifying whatever the last word is here. So let's go ahead and figure out what this non-essential phrase or clause is telling us. Well, fuels derived from once living material. Okay, fuels derived from once living material. Well, what is that going to be? That's going to be biofuels, right? If we take a look at the last word in each of our answer choices, it's not going to be a study. Okay, so we can get rid of A. It's not going to be combustion. We can get rid of B. It's not going to be combustion. We can get rid of C. It has to be biofuels because we're stating what biofuels are immediately after. So our answer there has to be D. That's how you can solve 35 really quickly. All right, let's go ahead and finish out reading this. We have the standard method involves burning droplets of fuel, but Earth's gravitational influence caused the droplets to lose spherical symmetry while burning. Now we're asked for which choice provides the most precise description of the phenomenon depicted in the previous sentence. Well, that was the loss of spherical symmetry. Okay, what would we call that? We would call that a loss of form or a deformation. That's why A is our correct answer there. It's not an alteration. It's not a transformation. It's not a modification. It's a loss of form because it's losing its shape. So this deformation results in subtle variations in density that both cause uneven heat flow and limit the size of the droplets that can be tested. Now you'll notice I was able to immediately come up with the correct answer, which will be answer choice B. How was I able to do that? Well, I was able to recognize the number of my subject and then apply that to my verbs. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at that. Right, we have the number of our subject. If you're struggling to figure that out, one thing that's an indicator, you have both. You also can recognize that both is referring to variation. So your subject has to be plural. Okay, you ignore in density because it's a prepositional phrase. So now you've determined that your subject's plural. You know your verbs have to be plural. Therefore, you have to have cause and you have to have limit. From there, if we go ahead and look at our answer choice, we can get rid of A. We can get rid of C because it has limits. Okay, so then you'd be between B and D, and then you just recognize, okay, what tense have I been in? Well, I've been in the present tense, but also you can just recognize that has caused, that's singular. Okay, it's got has would be singular, therefore we have the plural subject. Answer's got to be B. So really, you don't even necessarily need to determine tense here. You can get it just based on determining the number of your subject. All right, moving on to number 38, the size of the droplets that can be tested. Specially designed drop towers built for this purpose. We already know they're built for this purpose because it says specially designed, so we can go and get rid of answer choice A. We know that they're intended for this use. We know they're constructed for this function. Answer choices A, B, and C, they're all redundant and repetitive. Therefore, we're going to get rid of them. We're going to delete the underlined portion. All right, reduce these problems, but they provide no more than 10 seconds of microgravity, and droplet size is still too small to produce accurate models of combustion rates. Now we have question 39. The UCSD students understood that these limitations might be surmounted, or had to be surmounted. Which choice provides the most effective transition between the ideas in the paragraph? We have to read on to figure out what that transition is. We have as part of the program. We haven't not talked about a program yet. Therefore, we need to introduce a program in this sentence, okay, that we're going to end up putting in. Researchers fly their experiments aboard aircraft that simulate the microgravity environment of space. The aircraft accomplishes this feat by flying in parabolic paths instead of horizontal ones. On the plane's ascent, passengers feel twice Earth's gravitational pull, but for brief periods at the peak trajectory, weightlessness or microgravity similar to what is experienced in space is achieved. One thing I recognize immediately in 40, I've got a non-essential phrase or clause. I'm going to highlight that so you can see it, or microgravity similar to what is experienced in space, okay? Because we can just say, if I scroll up a little bit, but for brief periods at the peak of the trajectory, weightlessness is achieved. As you can see, we can take out everything I highlighted there. Therefore, it's not essential. Therefore, we can go ahead and answer question 40 real quick. We see that we can get rid of B because there's no punctuation there. Get rid of C, there's no punctuation there, or there is, but it's after the or, and it's got to come before the or. And then we see that we're ultimately left with answer choice D. Okay, A also doesn't have that punctuation between weightlessness and or. So answer there's got to be D. All right, moving back up though to answer number 39. So ultimately what we're making here is a transition into talking about this program, but we haven't introduced the program yet. So we have to do that with our answer in 39. If we take a look at A, which would be no change, there's no mention of a program. So we can get rid of A. If we look at B, we have the UCSD students, or the UCSD group sought to overcome these difficulties by participating in NASA's Microgravity University program. Okay, we have a discussion of a program. Talk about NASA's Microgravity University program. That all sounds perfect. Okay, B will be our answer. It's setting up that discussion of the program. It's correct. I'm going to go ahead and show you why C and D are incorrect as well here. C says the engineering group realized that aircraft might be the tools they were looking for. No mention of a program. That's wrong. D, thus for the UCSD group, drop towers were not an adequate solution. Once again, no mention of the program. D is wrong. B is our correct answer there. Moving on, we've already read through that. We've read up to 40. Okay, so we got these flights allowed the UCSD students to experience microgravity. And now we're told the writer is considering adding the following point and perform their experiment without traveling into space. Should we add this? Answer, yes. Why? Well, because ultimately what we're doing is we're showing why this part of our sentence that's not, that we're not considering adding, we're showing why it matters, okay? It's not just about allowing them to experience microgravity. That might be a cool thing to experience, but we're worried about this study, okay? And ultimately, or this experiment. And ultimately, the point of them making this travel is to perform their experiment without traveling into space, right? That's the point of them entering this program. I shouldn't have said travel there. That's the point of them entering this program with NASA. All right, so should the writer make this addition here? Answer, yes. We can go ahead and get rid of C and D. Okay, why? Well, we have the option of because it's elaborating on the advantages students gain from the flights. Exactly. Okay, if we look at B, yes, because it reveals the students did not actually go into space, a point that the previous paragraph does not address. That previous paragraph, I believe it does address, but even if it doesn't, the whole point of including this addition here is because it is elaborating on that advantage. All right, and then we can go ahead and move on to 42. Specifically, they investigated. I'm assuming we're going to be dealing with different tenses of investigated, and I'm correct there. All right, so big thing here is that we need to understand and recognize that we said these flights allowed the UCSD students to experience microgravity, right? We're focused in on what this program's allowing them to do. So we wouldn't say specifically they investigated the combustion of biofuel droplets in microgravity for twice as long as could be accomplished. This is another key part. As could be accomplished in drop towers and to perform tests with larger droplets. We're showing what this program allowed them to do. Okay, this back half of this sentence is very, very important. We're ultimately showing what this program's allowing them to do. Therefore, we want to show not that they've already done it, because we're still showing what the program's allowing them to do. We really wouldn't say could investigate, right? If I scroll up, they would say specifically they could investigate. We want to focus on what the program's enabling them to do. Okay, so we want to focus in on what they were able to investigate as a result of being in that program. That's why answer choice D is correct there. It's showing that the program's what's allowing them to do this. All right, moving on to 43 now. We've got which choice most effectively establishes that UCSD students' approach had solved a problem mentioned earlier in the passage related to burning fuel on Earth. What was that problem that they had with burning fuel on Earth? It was losing its shape, right? If we remember back to one of those questions, we talked about deformation. So we want to show an answer choice here that's talking about them, the droplets, not losing their shape now that they're in this program. So we have the larger spherically symmetric droplets showing they're not losing that symmetry or that shape, burned longer and gave the students more reliable data on combustion rates. Yes, answer choice A. We're not really concerned with combustion or microgravity influence or biofuel derived. We're focused on the fact that the droplets are able to keep their shape now, thus we're getting that more reliable data. All right, because the droplets uniform shape, right? So there it is again. Reduce the variations in density that hinder tests performed in normal gravity. The students hope the new data will aid future research by improving theoretical models of biofuel combustion. Better combustion rate models may even lead to the production of more fuel-efficient engines and improved techniques for fighting fires in space or at future outputs. All right, one thing jumps out to me immediately. We don't need a comma there. I'm going to get rid of A. We also don't need a comma between fires in space. Okay, we're not dealing with anything that's not essential here, so we don't need any commas because of that. At the same time, there's also no list, no need for a comma because of that. So answer choice C. Okay, they're just testing that not to just toss in random commas in random places. Hopefully this video was helpful. If it was, make sure to like and subscribe. In addition to that, if you're looking to donate or if you're looking for my website where I offer private SAT prep, college essay brainstorming, and college essay editing, then be sure to check out the links in the description.